Hello everyone, and welcome back to a Hearts Find for Dev Diary, or 2 Dev Diaries I should say, as I kind of missed the last one being on holiday. Alas, since I was on holiday though, I thought it right to start off by looking at the Plane Designer Dev Diary of last week, only briefly because I'm sure most people have seen it by now, and just looking at some of the core changes that are going to be coming with it. After that we'll look at this week's Dev Diary, talking about division commanders, division planning, and lots of roleplay stuff that comes with it. So without further ado, let's begin. So in last week's missing episode we had a Dev Diary talking about the Plane Designer, and it's getting a pretty sizable overhaul in terms of its core components, but with some very familiar systems if we've all done the Army Tank Designer and the Navy Ship Designer. After establishing some core information about the method in which planes are going to be built, there is a straightforward TLDR that involves that now planes are not separated by the class of role they have, but just by the size of the plane. I think this is easier explained if you see an image of the new tech tree. So as we see here, you can see interwar small airframes, medium frames and large frames for the different planes that you can make, and there's no like fighters or CAS or bombers, it's just the frames, and now the weapons you assign to those frames is going to determine what type of plane it is. So you want a large heavy fighter, you get a large frame and stick fighter weapons on it. You want a small naval bomber, you stick the naval bombing equipment on the small airframe. Pretty straightforward when you look at it like that. As such, we have an example here of a plane designer with the advanced naval bomber, which has taken a plane, and in the top left slot, which is the little torpedo bombing chute thing you can see there, this is what has created a naval bomber. In addition, this also means that other types of plane have also gone down the creek, meaning that jet planes, which were their own type of planes, are no longer types of planes at all, but modifications that you can stick on your main hulls of your planes. So you take the traditional engines and you'd stick jet engines on them, meaning there's like no separate plane class, it's just the frame and the type of engine you stick on it that would determine if it's a jet plane or not. Following on from that, we also have new modules coming in. Same way we've seen it with tanks and with ships, these modules give specific buffs in regards to what the individual weapons do, but more interesting than any of that is that now there's overlap. So you could build a primarily fighter plane and stick CAS related opponents and modules on it that will allow the plane to do CAS work, and also you could build a bomber plane that might have some light weaponry to give you some air superiority. There's a lot of mix and match you can do now, because now planes can do overlapping roles. In the Dev Diary, we saw a large collection of different modules you can get, and how when you apply those modules, you'll unlock missions related to those modules. So if you stick a bomb locks on a plane, you can do close air support, naval strike and port strike, and it will classify the plane as a CAS plane. So it really is no longer about choosing what plane you are researching, but more so what weaponry you're sticking as the main armament on that plane to determine the type of plane. In addition to that, there is also no limitations on what missions you can provide for different planes. Assuming you have the weaponry on any particular plane model, regardless of size or anything, if it has the capability to perform the mission, it can perform the mission. Meaning if your fighters have some module that makes them do CAS, your fighters can do the close air support mission and help your troops in the front line. It is worth noting, of course, that the less specialization you have for planes, the less capable they're going to be at performing and more so outperforming enemy planes who are specialized in that particular field. So making sure that you have planes that are specialist planes is probably still going to be somewhat important, but you do now have the option to have a little bit of overlap with other missions if you need to. Going back to the air tech tree, we now see that there are 28 techs shown in this work in progress photo as opposed to the 38 techs previously. This is important because less techs is actually more good as the game's getting on, because the amount of research slots we have is stagnant, but the amount of new techs that can get added seem to go up. So the fact that it's going back down again is good. It helps with the balancing of the game. It's also worth noting in this image that you can see that engines are a separate researchable category, meaning the power of your planes is also going to be increased through technologies. It's not just about the model of planes you're researching, but you're actually going to have to research specific techs with the planes to help them become even better. The final part of the dev diary talks about changes towards surface and subdetection, so some more focus on air superiority's effectiveness over water areas, the sea, with the addition of adding two new things, the maritime patrol planes as a dedicated unit type, and a special naval patrol mission for those planes with that right module, so they can keep an eye on the sea and make sure that, I guess there's like a relevant equivalent for air superiority over the sea regions. And with that, we reach the end of the plane dev diary. There was of course more specifics I could have gone into, but I just wanted to give a generally brief recap of the main changes and the main focuses that came with that dev diary before I talk about this week's dev diary. Also, they're adding art in the form of, I think, a zero plane for the Japanese. Cool. Okay, and with that, we reach this week's dev diary, talking about division commanders and unit medals, and a big image of Bydgoszcz at the top. I've been to Bydgoszcz. It was nice there. So the focus of this week's dev diary is actually talking more so about roleplay, really in-depth roleplay elements of the game, but there is something in here that is not roleplay and is actually significantly changing to the core structure of the game in the form of its division commanders. But we'll get to that later. The first thing to talk about is a new dynamic system for naming battle plans, which means that when you draw a battle plan against an enemy border, there's going to be a name assigned for that particular battle plan. We see our first, most obvious example here with the Germans against Poland with a Vollweiss. I think that's how you would say that. Vollweiss? Weisse? Vollweiss. Anyway. The point is that these are, for the most part, where they are available, going to be a historical series of operation tags which will account for what is the nation that you are playing, what is the nation you are battle planning against, and probably some geographical corrections based upon where you've put the border to create a title which is relevant to a historical battle plan that would have happened in regards to World War II. In equivalent, I imagine if you do a naval invasion of France, if it's owned by Germany as the UK or America or France, there's probably going to be some like D-Day related naval invasions relating to the like beachheads that you land in and stuff that's similar to that. On the flip side, because this game has so much potential to be ahistorical, there also is the option for semi-randomly generated custom names for battle plans that will generate based on, as I say, the nation you're playing and some relative naming conventions related to what that country probably would have called the battle plan if they did it. In the case example we have here, we have the Eastern Poland Strategic Offensive Operation as the Soviets plan to invade Eastern Poland and take their chunk. I think calling it a strategic operation is it's hitting a little bit too close to home for me, but I completely believe it. If we were to hypothesize then, you'd imagine situations like if the Brazilians went after Uruguay, you'd have like the Brazilian Southern Thrust against Uruguay, or perhaps maybe something called like Operation Sea Lion Landings. If it was actually going to be a naval invasion of Germany towards England, you'd imagine the naming convention would be appropriate. But as they say themselves, because things are probably going to be uninventive, for the most part, a lot of them are going to be called the country that you're invading and something like offensive operation or offensive invasion or something of that character. They go on to say that these invasions can be renamed if you wanted to. So if you're into roleplay, you can call your invasion Operation Fabulous, as they've done here. If I was to name one, I think I'd call one Home by Christmas. You know, very successful naming conventions that are sure to guarantee my success. The next section talks about perhaps the most important topic of this dev diary, the division commanders. So, how do we even begin with this one? As it stands right now, possibly the lowest form of head of command that you have is the generals, which you kind of just click on your army And at the top left, you'll just assign a general from a list, or you'll spend some command power to get a general. Now there is a lower form of officer, which is quite literally the officer. These commanding officers are division heads. So that means every single division, I think everyone completely in the entire game, will have an officer assigned to that division when you spawn it, with, I think, a randomly generated portrait and name based upon the naming list that they have for individual generals in the game, meaning that the officers will have, that you can literally might have hundreds of these people for every single division in the game. So as we see in this example we're given here, the 1st Panzer Division of Germany now has General Major Maximilian von Weichs as its officer, which would be underneath an army led by a general, which would be underneath a field marshal, which could control 5 or 7 of those armies. So that's there's quite a lot of going on here now. As we can see here, these field officers will be quite numerous, and they don't come with any stats. They only exist as individuals within those specific divisions. So you don't need to worry about clicking on each of them and leveling them up, or worrying about not getting specific buffs, or choosing the right ones. They just go in and that's it. You don't need to swap them. They're just straight in. It is worth mentioning as a side note that because of the amount of field officers that need to be added, because some countries have 100+ divisions, that there's going to be an additional amount of generic portraits for these field officers. That being said though, they're only focusing for now on adding more for major nations only. So sadly we won't see 25 different versions of Tanotuvan field officers, but that might be something you see in the future, but probably not. But you can hope, at least. Now this is by far the coolest part, in my opinion. So, as I said earlier, and as you saw, these field officers do not have stats, not in the traditional sense of their attack, their defense, they just exist. However, they do gain experience, they have history, and they have events that they can participate in that gain them experience and honour. As such, the unit's individual details, which is now a menu that you can pop up to look at for each individual unit, you can look at the history of the unit and find out things that this unit has done historically. So in the case of the 14th Polish Division here, we can see that they took part in the occupation of Berlin, the former seat of the German government, which was such a historic event for this particular unit that they have a little icon to the left that allows them to have a medal. Medals are basically the leveling up stat for these specific units, which you can give them if you have political power to give them very minor buffs. He says very minor, knowing full well that there are people out there absolutely planning to try hard, exploit, take advantage of all of it, but in general the mindset is this isn't something you need to hyper focus on. It's more so a mid to late game mechanic that as you participate in more historic battles, your units are going to get far more experience, and you're going to be able to reward them for their participation in historic events, like taking Berlin. On the flip side, of course, not every action you take with units will be worthy of a medal. We see that on the 4th of January they seized an airfield, and the airfield isn't exactly the greatest thing in the world, but it's of importance enough that it was worth mentioning on the history of the unit. As such, in the next image we can see the example of a unit being given a medal. So they took part in the siege of Lodz, and they are picking between a form of Knight's Cross, a standard, an oak leaves, or a swords and diamonds, which gives various buffs, mostly, I think, very relevant to tanks in the form of breakthrough, supply consumption. I feel like they're pretty good on that front. The dev diary goes on to describe that units can receive multiple medals. However, the cost for each will increase as more are granted to any given unit. And additionally, the effect of stacking specific medals will decrease per instance of the same effect. That means that if you keep doing a similar action, let's say taking a capital, and you keep getting an Iron Cross, you can't continually stack division org buffs over and over again, because it's going to have diminishing return effects. So I guess it goes from 10 to 15 to 17.5 or something similar. Like each time you add another medal of the same class, the effect you get is less and less powerful. Moving on from this, we talk about how, as mentioned, as I said earlier, and as the dev diary talks about, that the way of achieving generals was by finding them in thin air using command power. Well, now the way you're going to have to find generals is among your unit's officers. Going on from this, there's discussion about how particular field officers that you have will have more experience. So let's say you have a field officer that maybe you're playing as Mexico and you've sent them off to the Spanish Civil War or some other country and you've leveled them up in the Spanish Civil War. Well, now you might have use of them as a general, so all the experience that they gained as being a field officer in that particular battle might allow them to be promoted to become a general. I'm unclear as to how the specific experience they gain being an officer translates into them being a general, because in the image we see here, Maximilian has got 1111 stats. So he didn't exactly get too much experience in terms of transitioning to stats. However, we do see that the medals he has with his field citations do get carried over. So all the cool actions you completed with that particular officer are not going to be forgotten when he becomes a general, and he carries them with him, although they don't do anything. But for the roleplay experience, you can follow your favorite character from his early beginnings as leading one small division, and he gets upgraded to a general, and he's on his ladder all the way to being the chief of the army. How wholesome. The final part of this section talks about, as we just said, the experience they gained when they were a field officer is translated into experience as the general, and in addition there will also be some corresponding mechanic that allows personality traits to be incorporated into their general role. So if they were, for example, leading an armor corps or a cavalry corps, there is a chance they'll start with a trait which gains them experience gain for armor traits or cavalry traits, or etc, etc. I just want to say that I think this is by far one of the coolest things about this. I've always enjoyed the idea that you're taking these very unknown characters, who just joined, they took a small position in a division, and you have the ability to build them up and level them up and make them a general, and then because of the army corps mechanic, you can actually make them a part of like your government's central army command and make them like a chief of the army or something. I don't know, I feel like there's really good storytelling devices in there, and I'm a big fan of it. Our next section is talking about unit cohesion, which is in short terms basically just another button that's being added to your battle plans. In the image we see here, and it's not quite relevant to unit cohesion, but it is worth noticing, if you look just above the exercise button, it actually says the name of the offensive, the Vorweis, there, so you know exactly which battle you're looking at for that particular thing. We've also seen a little bit of a rearrangement of the buttons. I don't remember the front line button being so centered, so there has been some changes here. But yes, you'll notice the main addition is the flexible cohesion button, which is actually toggleable between 3 different options. They describe that this cohesion parameter can be set between flexible cohesion, which is how you would currently expect it to work in the game. So what it does is, whenever there is a gap in your front line, a unit which is assigned to that front line will quickly move as fast as they can to go fill that gap. It doesn't matter where on the line they are, if they find that there's a gap on the line, they will travel 10 tiles or more to go fill that gap, and that's what they'll do. Next up, we have balanced cohesion. This is where units will try to fill in the gaps, but only gaps that are relatively close by. And finally, you have rigid cohesion, which is units are basically only going to defend the place where they are, but if there's a gap in the line a few tiles down, they're going to be hard pressed to go fill it because their focus is maintaining their current position and not spreading out. In case you're wondering what the concept behind this is, it's that there is a common thing in Hoi 4 where sometimes your units are advancing so quickly and things are moving around so much that empty parts of your front line are just appearing, and units that perhaps had entrenchment or had been focused on an offensive in one location might just lose all of their org and travel to a completely different part of the line for what seems to you like no reason. And it just makes no sense. And you're like, maybe there was a unit a tile away that could have gone, but no. The unit that was 10 tiles away went instead, and your front lines are like scurrying around like little ants. In short, this is supposed to help with that, by meaning that units will not be travelling extreme distances to go full in front lines, and you'll have more manual control over making sure that your front line is secure. The downside of this, of course, is you're going to have to keep a good eye on the front line, because now it's your responsibility to make sure you've got a decent plethora of troops in relative proximity to one another to make sure that frontline gaps don't appear, because if they do appear and draw on rigid cohesion, nobody's going to fix it but you. The final section of the dev diary talks about modding, for those who like to do modding, I suppose. And they talk about how there's a great deal of customizability in terms of what you want to do with the new officer system, giving them like historical commanders. So if you have a list of divisions, you can assign historical commanders that you might want to add. If you're doing your own alt history, world, ponies, Great War, Fallout, whatever, if you want to stick in an officer relevant for that division in that specific time or whatever, you can actually set these if you want to. Also, it says that medals themselves can be added to the medal array, and they all support different modifiers. So if you want to do some interesting medals that you want to give people, I'm just trying to think, like, what medal would you want to give? Maybe you want to do like an inverted medal where if you attacked a city that you shouldn't have done, like Rome, the Vatican, you get the Holy Defier modifier, and it gives you like a negative debuff, maybe as a joke. I don't know. I'm sure there are much more intelligent modders than me who can figure out an interesting use for creating their own medals and adding them in different ways. And finally, they show that name combinations can also be split from random lists, so you can also do randomly generated weird names for your operations if you want to add in more thematic things for your own mods. And with that, that's this week and last week's Dev Diaries. So yeah, good stuff. I didn't have too much to say about the plane designer, but I think in general, it's just a very straightforward, good change. I truly can't think of anything negative. They have the system. They're kind of perfecting the system because it was a little bit shaky with Man the Guns, but I think it's really coming into its own and it's becoming a lot more clear now. And in terms of this division, like field officer stuff, it's great. It's fantastic. I love it. I truly have no issue with it. I can't even think of anything to criticize right now. I guess the only question I have is, if you're in a situation where you're struggling to hire more divisions, maybe you've run out of manpower, it would be awkward if you then can't get specific generals that you wanted, because you can't click the hire new general button, the magical general button, unless that's been moved. And additionally, I wonder how Army Corps buffs are going to work, because previously there was a thing where if you recruited generals and you had the first tier of the Army Corps, you could get like specific 50% bonuses towards the chance that you would get a personality trait, like army or infantry officers or inflexible strategist or stuff like that. So I wonder if those buffs are going to be translated thoroughly with the field officer promotion mechanic. I assume they are going to be. Okay, sorry for rambling. I hope I won't keep you too much longer. Thank you for watching. If you liked, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe. You're cool, and become a field officer today. Oh, and next week is peace conferences, so hopefully Portugal will be able to connect Mozambique and Angola and not get screwed over in a peace conference. Maybe. Probably not. Bye.